The machine sits at the back of the lot, behind two newer tractors and a row of implements that the dealer has arranged along the fence line in the way that small, independent equipment dealers arrange their inventory, which is with the presentable iron up front where the road traffic sees it, and the questionable iron in the back where you have to walk past everything else before you get to it. Ray Mullen walks past everything else. He is not interested in the newer tractors because he cannot afford the newer tractors, and he's not interested in the implements because he did not come to this lot for implements. He came because a neighbor mentioned that a dealer 2 townships over had a Massey Ferguson utility tractor on his lot at a price that fit inside the range Ray has been working with since he decided 3 months ago that the secondary tractor situation on his farm needed to be resolved before spring planting made the absence of one operationally painful rather than merely inconvenient. Ray farms 600 acres, rents most of it, owns a primary tractor that handles the heavy field work, and has been running his secondary operations with borrowed equipment and favors for 2 seasons since his previous utility tractor developed a final drive failure that the repair estimate made economically indefensible relative to the machine's market value. He needs a utility tractor. He has a budget. The machine at the back of the lot is according to the price on the handwritten tag wired to the steering wheel inside the budget. He walks around it twice before he says anything to the dealer, who has followed him to the back of the lot, with the particular energy of a man who knows which piece of his inventory a customer is going to end up at, and who has prepared for that conversation. The tractor presents well from the outside. The paint is clean and consistent. The Massey Ferguson red applied evenly across all the sheet metal panels without the orange peel texture of a rushed spray job or the visible masking lines of a partial repaint. The decals are present and correctly positioned, the Massey Ferguson badging on the hood and the side panels and the rear of the machine placed where it should be placed on the model the tag describes. The tires have reasonable tread. The cab glass is intact. The 3-point hitch looks functional. The exhaust stack is straight. From the outside, walking around it twice in the afternoon light of a March day with mud still on his boots from the morning's field check, Ray Mullen sees a utility tractor that looks like what the tag says it is, which is a Massey Ferguson in fair condition at a price that fits his budget. The dealer's name is Gary Fetch. He has been operating this lot for 11 years, buying and selling used agricultural equipment across a territory that extends through 3 counties, operating the kind of business that exists in the space between the franchise dealerships, with their certified pre-owned programs, and their service departments and their parts inventories, and the purely private transactions between individual operators that happen through classified listings and word of mouth, and the informal equipment networks that rural communities maintain. Gary occupies the middle ground, buying machines that come through estate sales and insurance auctions and private motivated sellers, doing whatever work makes them presentable, and selling them at a margin that reflects the value he has added to the transaction, which is finding the machine, assessing it, making it available, and standing there at the back of the lot answering questions for the Ray Mullins of the county who need a utility tractor and have a budget that does not reach the franchise dealerships. Gary answers Ray's questions. He answers them in the practiced way of a man who knows his inventory and who knows which questions are coming and who has thought about how to answer them in ways that are technically accurate without volunteering information that the customer has not specifically requested. He answers the question about the engine hours by referencing the gauge, which shows a number that is plausible for the machine's represented age and condition. He answers the question about the service history by saying the machine has been maintained and that it runs correctly, both of which are true in the narrow sense that the machine has received some maintenance and that it does run correctly in the light load conditions of a walk-around demonstration. He answers the question about any known issues by saying the machine is sold as is, which is the standard formulation for used equipment transactions of this kind, and which is technically a non-answer delivered in the tone of a complete one. Ray asks whether the machine has been painted recently. Gary says the machine has been freshened up, which is also technically accurate, and which Ray interprets as normal cosmetic preparation for sale, the kind of cleaning and touch-up that any dealer does to inventory before putting it on the lot, and which is in fact something considerably more extensive than that, but which the phrase freshened up does not require Gary to specify. Ray asks to hear it run. Gary starts it. The engine comes up and idles and sounds like a diesel engine idling, which is not a specific enough observation to reveal anything useful about its origin or its internal architecture, because diesel engines of the size and generation represented by this machine share enough acoustic characteristics at idle that the sound alone is not a diagnostic tool for anything beyond the obvious question of whether the engine runs. It runs. Ray listens for a minute and nods. He operates the three-point hitch through its range of motion, which functions correctly. He engages the PTO, which engages correctly. He sits in the seat and looks at the instrument cluster and operates the steering through its range, which is normal. He does not put the machine under load. He does not drive it across ground that would reveal anything about the transmission's behavior under draft conditions or the hydraulic system's response to sustained implement demand. He does not request a compression test or a hydraulic pressure test or any of the diagnostic procedures that would require tools and time that the back of a dealer lot on a March afternoon does not naturally accommodate. He does what most buyers of used utility tractors at this price level do, which is assess the obvious indicators and make a judgment about whether the machine represents adequate value for the asking price based on what the obvious indicators reveal. The obvious indicators reveal a machine that runs, operates its basic functions correctly, presents cleanly, and is priced within his budget. Ray negotiates briefly, lands on a final number that is modestly below the tag price, and agrees to buy the machine. Gary writes up a bill of sale. The title transfers. Ray arranges transport, and the machine arrives on his farm the following Saturday morning. What Gary Fetch did to that machine in the 6 weeks between purchasing it at a flood damage insurance auction and selling it to Ray Mullen is not a story that Gary has told anyone and does not intend to tell anyone. The machine he purchased at the auction is a John Deere utility tractor that was flooded during a facility storage event at a dealership that took water during a river overflow in the previous autumn. One of 11 machines the dealership submitted to its insurer as flood-damaged total losses, and that went through the insurance company's salvage auction process in the standard way, sold to the highest bidder with full disclosure that the machines had been flooded, that they were total losses on the insurer's assessment, and that they were being sold without any warranty or representation regarding their mechanical condition. Gary bid on 3 machines at that auction and won 2 of them, the John Deere utility tractor and a different make that he processed separately. He paid salvage prices for both, prices that reflected the flood damage status and the total loss designation, and the uncertainty about what water intrusion at that level does to the internal systems of a machine that was submerged for an estimated 36 hours based on the watermark evidence on the exterior panels. Gary's assessment of the John Deere, conducted over 2 days in his shop after transport, identifies a machine whose internal mechanical systems have survived the flood event in better condition than the exterior and the electrical systems, which are more severely compromised. The engine, which was not running at the time of the flood and whose intake was sealed, shows no evidence of hydraulic lock or internal water contamination on the inspection Gary conducts, which is a visual inspection and a manual rotation check rather than a comprehensive diagnostic. The transmission feels functional on manual check. The hydraulic system shows fluid that has some water contamination visible in the color and consistency, which Gary addresses by draining and flushing and refilling with fresh fluid, a procedure that removes the visible contamination without necessarily addressing contamination in components the fluid has already contacted. The electrical system is the most significantly compromised, with corrosion on multiple connectors and 2 control modules that Gary replaces with used components sourced from a parts machine, replacements that restore basic functionality without restoring the full integrity of a system that has been through submersion. The exterior and the identity transformation take the majority of Gary's preparation time. He strips the John Deere green paint from every exterior panel using chemical stripper and mechanical abrasion, a process that takes several days, and that requires more effort than a simple paint over, because green paint showing through red on any surface that chips or wears would be an immediate and obvious problem. He applies primer and then Massey Ferguson red in the correct shade, using automotive-grade spray equipment in his shop's enclosed bay, and the result is a paint job that is cosmetically indistinguishable from a factory finish to a buyer who is not looking for the specific indicators that a professional inspector would look for, which include paint thickness inconsistencies detectable only with specialized measurement tools, and overspray patterns in areas that factory paint processes do not reach the same way a field repaint does. He removes the John Deere badging and the serial number plate from the primary identification location and replaces it with a Massey Ferguson plate sourced from a salvage machine of the approximately correct model and year, a substitution that produces a VIN that is a real Massey Ferguson VIN attached to a machine that is not the machine the VIN describes. He sources Massey Ferguson decals from an aftermarket supplier and applies them correctly. He replaces the seat cover with a Massey Ferguson branded replacement. He addresses the instrument cluster, substituting Massey Ferguson instrumentation for the John Deere original, a swap that requires fabrication work to fit correctly, but that produces an interior that presents as consistent with the machine's claimed identity to a buyer who has not spent time in both brands' cab configurations and who does not notice the mounting irregularities that the fabrication work leaves in the cluster surround. However, the machine that Ray Mullen buys is a John Deere utility tractor wearing a Massey Ferguson identity, constructed from salvage parts, aftermarket decals, fabricated instrument mounting, and a paint job that cost Gary Fetch 3 weeks of shop time and a materials investment that is justified by the margin between what he paid at the flood damage auction and what he sells the machine for to Ray. The title Gary provides is a Massey Ferguson title for the VIN on the substituted plate, processed through a state title system that does not have the cross-referencing capability to flag a VIN that is real but attached to the wrong physical machine. The transaction is complete and documented, and the machine is on Ray Mullen's farm before the first field day of the spring planting season. Ray runs the machine through the spring without significant incident, which is the outcome that Gary Fetch's preparation was designed to produce, and which it does produce because the machine's mechanical systems, flood damaged but not destroyed, are capable of the light to moderate duty of a spring planting support role without revealing the internal architecture that distinguishes them from the Massey Ferguson systems the machine is claiming to be. The hydraulic system operates adequately. The transmission functions through the ranges Ray uses for the secondary work he assigns the machine. The engine runs without the kind of behavioral anomaly that would prompt a service call or a diagnostic investigation during a season when Ray's attention is on his primary tractor and his crop establishment and all the other demands that a 600-acre spring planting season makes on a single operator. The machine is present. The machine works. Ray has no reason to look at it with anything other than the satisfaction of a problem he solved before it became operationally painful. The problem that Gary Fetch's preparation did not fully resolve, and could not fully resolve without a level of system reconstruction that would have made the economics of the fraud unworkable, is the flood damage that was never visible during Ray's purchase assessment, and that the flushing and replacement work Gary performed addressed superficially rather than completely. Water that enters a machine's electrical and hydraulic systems during a submersion event does not leave those systems completely when the visible fluid is drained and replaced. It leaves traces in component housings, in valve bodies, in the microscopic passages of hydraulic circuits, in the wiring harness sections that Gary did not replace, because replacing them completely would have required a level of disassembly that the preparation timeline did not accommodate. Those traces do what water traces do in mechanical systems over time and under heat and load cycling, which is to accelerate corrosion in the metal components they have contacted and to degrade the elastomer seals and the electrical insulation in the systems they have reached. The degradation is not immediate, it is progressive. It proceeds at a rate determined by the severity of the original contamination, the operating conditions the machine is subjected to, and the particular vulnerability of each affected component to the ongoing chemical process that the flood exposure initiated. Harvest is when the rate of that degradation meets the level of load and heat and continuous operating duration that makes its consequences visible. Ray puts the machine on grain cart duty in the first week of October, running it alongside his combine through the heavy corn that his best fields are producing that year, a role that requires the tractor to operate at sustained load levels for extended periods that are fundamentally different from the intermittent, moderate-duty work of the spring season. The hydraulic system is under continuous demand. The transmission is cycling through its operating range repeatedly at loads that reflect the weight of a full-grain cart on terrain that is not always level. The electrical system is managing the sustained current demands of a machine working at capacity rather than the lighter demands of secondary field tasks. Within the first 3 days of harvest duty, the machine begins showing symptoms that Ray notices and cannot reconcile with his understanding of what a Massey Ferguson utility tractor of this model and age should be doing under these conditions. The hydraulic system develops a pressure inconsistency that manifests as a regular lift response on the grain cart hitch, a behavior that causes the cart to hunt rather than hold a consistent position during transport. Ray adjusts the hydraulic flow settings, which moderates the symptom without resolving it. The transmission begins showing a hesitation in one of the ranges that is subtle enough on the first day to be dismissed as operator technique and pronounced enough by the third day to be a confirmed mechanical behavior rather than a perception artifact. The electrical system produces its first hard fault on the 5th day of harvest, a warning indicator that Ray does not recognize from the instrument documentation he has been working from, which is a Massey Ferguson service manual he purchased after the spring season to have a reference for the machine he owns. He looks up the indicator code in the manual. The code is not in the manual, not as an unlisted code that the manual's coverage has missed, not as a code that appears under a different designation. It is simply absent from the diagnostic reference for the model and the instrument system the manual covers, which means that either the manual is wrong about what it covers, which manuals of this kind are not, or the instrument system generating the code is not the system the manual was written for. Ray calls a Massey Ferguson service technician on the 6th day of harvest. The technician arrives the following morning with his diagnostic equipment and his service references and the particular orientation of a man who has been told he is coming to look at a specific model of machine and who arrives expecting to find that machine. He begins with the electrical fault that Ray described on the phone, connecting his diagnostic tool to the machine's diagnostic port in the location and with the connector type that the model requires. The connector does not mate correctly. The technician looks at the port and then looks at his connector and then looks at the machine in the way of a man who has just encountered a physical reality that does not match his professional expectation. He tries the connection twice. It does not mate correctly either time. He gets out his flashlight and looks at the port more carefully, and what he sees is a port that is the correct general category of diagnostic connection, but that is not the Massey Ferguson specific configuration that his equipment is designed to interface with. It is a different manufacturer's configuration, adapted with a connector surround that was fabricated to approximate the Massey Ferguson location and profile without replicating the internal pin arrangement that determines compatibility. The technician does not say anything immediately. He walks around the machine with his flashlight and with the specific attention of a man who is now looking for things he was not looking for when he arrived. He looks at the instrument cluster mounting and sees the irregularities in the surround that the fabrication work left. He looks at the hydraulic line routing and notices that the configuration at the rear of the machine follows a pattern that is not consistent with the Massey-Ferguson hydraulic architecture for this model. He looks at the engine from above and identifies a component configuration on the injection system that is not the configuration he expects for this engine designation. He does not have to look long. A technician who has spent years working on one brand of equipment develops a visual familiarity with its engineering patterns that registers discrepancies quickly, not always with immediate identification of what the discrepancy is, but with immediate recognition that something is not right. And the something that is not right on this machine is not a single anomaly that might have an innocent explanation. It is a pattern of anomalies that points in one direction only. He tells Ray that he needs to make some calls before he can proceed with the diagnosis. He steps away from the machine and makes those calls, including one to a colleague who works on John Deere equipment. And after a conversation that takes 12 minutes, he comes back to where Ray is standing and tells him what his inspection and his colleague's remote confirmation have established, which is that the machine Ray is standing next to is not the machine the title and the badging and the paint claim it to be. Ray listens to this without saying anything for a moment. Then he asks the technician to explain it again, not because he did not understand it the first time, but because the human response to information that reorganizes a significant financial decision you made 7 months ago is to need to hear it twice before it becomes real, rather than a thing someone is saying to you. The technician explains it again. Ray asks how this is possible. The technician tells him as much as he can see from the outside of the machine, which is enough to describe the transformation that has been performed, but not enough to explain the full chain of events that produced the machine in its current state. Ray calls Gary Fetch that afternoon from his farm lane, with the combine sitting idle in the field and the grain cart that is not what he thought it was sitting beside it. The conversation is brief because Gary ends it quickly by saying he will need to talk to his attorney before he can discuss anything about the machine, which is the response of a man who understands immediately what the call means and who has been expecting some version of it, with the background anxiety that accompanies a fraud that was always going to be discovered eventually by anyone who looked closely enough at the right moment. Ray calls a county sheriff's deputy next, then he calls an attorney, then he calls the technician back and asks him to document everything he found in writing, which the technician does, because documenting findings is part of his professional practice, and because he understands that what he found is going to be relevant in a proceeding that is not a normal service call outcome. The investigation that follows is handled by the County Sheriff's Property Crimes Division, with assistance from the state's Department of Transportation, which has jurisdiction over fraudulent vehicle title processing. Gary Fetch's lot is searched. The John Deere flood damage documentation from the original Salvage auction is found in Gary's records, as is the paint stripper and the spray equipment and the Salvage Massey-Ferguson identification components and the aftermarket decal order and the fabrication materials used on the instrument cluster mounting. The evidence is not ambiguous. A man who has spent 6 weeks transforming a flood-damaged John Deere into a fraudulent Massey-Ferguson leaves behind the materials that transformation required, and those materials tell the story of what was done as clearly as any testimony could tell it. Gary Fetch is charged with fraud, title fraud, and obtaining money by deception. He does not contest the factual basis of the charges. He contests the characterization of his intent, which is the available position when the physical evidence of what you did is sitting in a sheriff's evidence lockup, documented with photographs and chain of custody records. Ray Mullen gets his money back through a combination of the criminal restitution process and a civil action that his attorney files against Gary Fetch personally and against the surety bond that Gary's dealer license required him to carry. The recovery is not immediate and is not complete, in the sense that it does not account for the harvest disruption and the cost of the service technician and the legal fees and the lost time, and the specific kind of anger that comes from discovering that a man looked you in the face and sold you a lie presented as a tractor. The machine is impounded as evidence and eventually sold at a salvage auction as what it actually is, which is a flood-damaged John Deere with a fraudulent Massey Ferguson identity, sold with full disclosure of its history at a price that reflects both the disclosure and the legal history attached to it, purchased by a buyer who knows exactly what he is buying and who intends to restore it on its own terms, rather than on anyone else's representation of what it is. Gary Fetch's dealer license is revoked. His lot, which had 11 years of operation behind it, and which served legitimate purposes across the majority of those 11 years, closes. The for sale signs come down. The inventory that was there is dispersed through an auction that the county oversees as part of the asset process. Ray Mullen buys a different utility tractor the following spring, sourced this time through a regional franchise dealer with a certified pre-owned program and a service history document and a technician inspection report attached to the listing. He pays more than he paid Gary Fetch. He does not consider this more to be a loss. He considers it the actual price of the thing he was trying to buy the first time, paid the second time to the kind of seller who charges the actual price rather than a lower price for a different thing presented as the same thing. The machine he buys the second time is what the paperwork says it is. He knows this because the paperwork is complete and the inspection report is specific, and the dealer who sells it to him is accountable to a franchise relationship and a license and a service department that will still be there if something turns out to be wrong. None of those things were true of Gary Fetch's lot at the back, of which a John Deere wearing Massey Ferguson paint sat in the March light, waiting for someone who needed a utility tractor and had a budget, and who would walk past the newer machines at the front of the lot and not look closely enough at the back to see the thing that the paint was covering, the thing that the instrument cluster fabrication was concealing, the thing that the salvage auction documentation in Gary's files recorded accurately before Gary decided to make the machine into something the documentation no longer described. The paint held through the spring, the harvest broke it. The truth was always in the machine. It just needed the right load and the right duration and the right technician with a flashlight and a diagnostic connector that would not mate to find it.